Hello there and welcome. It's Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing a sweet little festive Christmas craft project using one of the new Holtz Sizzix Sidekick side order set. As always, I encourage you to use supplies from your stash, but if you're interested in these supplies that I'm using, the links to them are available in the description box below. Just click on the word more for more. When you shop through those links, you are supporting me, and I really appreciate that so very much. Now let's get into the making. If you didn't know already, Holtz just released 5 new mini die and embossing folder sets, and these are called the Sidekick side order, and the idea is that they could be used with the Sizzix Sidekick machine. If you're not familiar with it, basically it's really just a small miniature die cutting machine that has its own set of cutting plates, and then this is the embossing pad that come with it, and the plates are only 2.5 inches in width, so it does limit what dies you can use with it, but that said, there are lots of dies out there that you can use with this and not have to have a large die cutting machine taking up space in your craft room or craft space. The new die sets are super cute and are kind of a range of themes that will get you all through the year. So there's a Christmas set called Christmas Minis. This one's called Letterboard. This one's called Coffee Break. This one's called Celebrate. And this one is called Love Notes. And if you are familiar with Tim's collection of dies and embossing folders from Sizzix, you'll probably recognize a lot of the art on these various sets because most of them came from previous sets and Tim just kind of resized them and maybe made them a little smaller or a little bit larger to create these new sets. And that same thing is with the embossing folders that come with each set as well. Each of the embossing folders is literally that, just a small embossing folder that is sized perfectly to fit on top of the die cutting plate, and then you use the embossing pad and then can run that through your Sidekick machine. Now, all that said, you do not need a Sizzix Sidekick to do die cutting with these or the embossing. You can use a regular die cutting machine. These are the same Thinlits dies that he creates with his regular die cutting sets, and these are just regular embossing folders. They're not 3D embossing folders, but just a regular embossing folder. So no matter what die cutting machine you have, you can easily use these to create some projects with. And I love that by getting even just one set, you can easily create a wide variety of little projects from cards to gift tags and so much more. As for my project, I'm going to be working with the Christmas Minis, and mostly that I was just really inspired because the holiday season is upon us and I just wanted to share some fun ideas using this set to create some gift tags. So along with the Christmas Minis die set, I'm also going to be using the Home for Christmas stamp set, and I'm just going to be using these 2 sentiments here, just small Merry Christmas and holiday greetings. So you could use any stamp set or stickers or whatever for your sentiments. And then I'm using a tag set. The tag I'm using is the stacked tags, and that just, I'm using this smaller tag. Again, reason being I want to have a die that will fit through the machine, and this comes with a variety of sizes. In fact, there's another one that's a little bit larger that will also go through the Sidekick and work with the embossing folder, but it was just a little bit larger than what I wanted for my project. Tim also has several other tag die sets. If you happen to have any of those, that would also be similar in sizes. So there is also the framed tags, and then there is also the tag collection. I am also going to be using the hole reinforcer from the frame tag sets. I just kind of like the vintage style of that. And then I'm also going to be using the hole punch that comes with the stacked tags, but it also has just a regular round reinforcer that you could use if you don't have this other die set and prefer this look. So it's really just a personal preference. As far as the papers I'm going to be working with, I'm going to be working with some distress watercolor cardstock, and I'm going to be spraying that with a variety of distress spray stains. And I've got a piece here that I sprayed with Lumberjack Plaid Distress Ink spray stain. And this one is a combination of Rustic Wilderness and Peeled Paint spray stains. And this one is the Walnut Stain. And then I'm also got some cardstock here that I'm going to use. I've got just black, green, and red. And then I'm also going to be die cutting and doing some stamping on just some white cardstock. So just any kind of cardstock will work for that. I'm going to be creating some little ties for my tags using some twine from Doodlebug and then just some rayon ribbon seam binding that this is just a 1/4 inch width. And the other mediums along with the spray stain, so I've got Lumberjack Plaid and Rustic Wilderness, Walnut Stain, and Peeled Paint. I'm going to be using the spray stains with the ribbons, and then the other mediums I've got here, I'm going to use some Ground Espresso Distress Ink, and then I'll be doing the stamping with some Ground Espresso Archival Ink. And I'm also going to be working with a white pigment ink. You could use the Picket Fence Distress Ink, which is actually a pigment-based type ink, so it would work. Or you could use the scrapbook.com. This is just another example, the scrapbook.com's white pigment ink. There's multiple companies out there though that have a white pigment ink that would work with this technique. And you also need a brayer, a little blending tool, and then I've got a couple of distress watercolor pencils here in dried marigold and carved pumpkin, and then a water brush, or you could use a paintbrush with water to do that. And we're going to use these to color some of the paper when we do some of the die cutting. All right, so to do the die cutting, I'm going to die cut some of the tags here from this red cardstock and then also the green. And I like to just kind of trim the paper down to size so that it fits on the cutting plate there. And then you can just position that in between the cutting pads. And then to help this get more sturdy so it's not moving around on your craft mat, it has a little handle here on the side that you can just flip over, and then it will kind of suction to your desktop. And then you'll just roll the handle towards you and run that through your die cutting machine. And if you get that little crack sound, that's completely normal. Nothing, you're not damaging anything if that happens. And then you've got your die cut tag there ready to go. So we're going to do that with both of the colors here. And then from there, we're just going to start die cutting all the little pieces that are going to go onto the tags and create our little images. And I've found that when doing the die cutting, you could certainly cut everything from white cardstock and then color it with ink, or you can just cut it from the different colors that you want and just cut multiples if you don't want to try to line things up and be more precise. It can get a little fussy doing it, you know, where you're just trying to get just this hat section here red and this little section here white. So I usually don't try to fuss too much if I kind of waste a little bit of paper. But, you know, for this here, what I would do is just trim a little piece that's slightly larger than the hat section on the die, and then position that onto the cutting plate with the die, and then run that through my die cutting machine. And then just repeat that process for the various layers. And then as I'm doing the die cutting, I like to use these little trays from scrapbook.com to just kind of help keep my little die cut pieces together so that I don't lose them during the process. And if I've got any little pieces that kind of get stuck in the die, I can just use my craft pick or the die cutting pick that you can buy and you know, pop that stuff out from the die. And so from here, I'm just going to continue cutting out all the little pieces that I know I want from the red paper. And this is one of those things where you could just kind of sit down. If you got all your papers ready to go, then you could just sit down and just do a bunch of die cutting all at once and then have those ready to go and assemble them all at once and kind of compartmentalize everything a little bit. So, you know, if you decide you wanted different colored candy canes, you know, maybe you wanted to do some green candy canes. So you can switch out the various pieces. Now I'll cut this one from some white cardstock. And I know I'm going to want this, this Santa piece here too, so I think I'm just going to cut a whole little piece here. So if you want to cut your papers kind of in 2.5-inch strips so that they easily fit on the cutting pad, and then you can just run them through your machine. And you might notice my machine is not staying stuck down on my surface. This will stay down on a glass mat or like a wood surface much better than it will this self-healing kind of craft mat surface. So again, we'll just kind of save all these little pieces, pop them in here. And have them all ready to go. Another piece that I'm going to want from the white is the snowman. Oh, I forgot to punch out this piece. This is going to be the face of the Santa, so we'll use that. And we can cut the little reinforcers from the white cardstock. You can also cut the little face and eyes and everything for the little gingerbread. And here I'm cutting out, I need the little nose for the snowman, so I'm just cutting that out. I forgot to include that when I was die cutting earlier. And so if you wanted to keep, you know, if you wanted to die cut all these and then color them, you can. But I'm going to die cut this more than once to get everything kind of the color I want for this particular one. Okay, and then for the little gingerbread man, I'm going to cut him from this spray stain background. And as you can see, I made this and then I've just used it for a variety of different projects this year. And just line him up on there. And run that through. And now I'm going to cut the little arm pieces for the snowman. And then now we've got a few pieces that I want to cut out from black cardstock. So got the hat for the snowman and the little his eyes, and so we'll put that on there. And then we also have Santa's eyes that we can use. So I think what I'm going to do is cut this down to little smaller pieces here. And then I can kind of position the dies on here and cut them both at the same time. So planning some of the die cutting and what colors you want to use and all that can kind of help as you're die cutting, so you can run a couple of the dies through it at the same time and kind of save a little bit of time as you're doing this. We got our little hat, and then we also got our snowman buttons and eyes. And the last piece here then is cutting this little holly leaf, and I'm going to cut this one multiple times because I'm going to kind of use this on each of the tags as just a little extra embellishment. And so from the green, I really just want these leaves, so I'll pop those out. And I don't really need the green berries, so I'm not going to use those. So the next bit of die cutting we need to do is punching the hole through the tag. And I had already played with this a little bit beforehand and had already determined that I did not want to necessarily put this all the way down onto the tag. I just felt like it was taking up a little bit too much space when I positioned my little die cut pieces. Especially the snowman, he seemed a little bit too tall with his hat because I want to make sure there's room down here for the little sentiment piece. So what I did is I took the hole, the die that we're going to use for the hole, and I kind of figured out where I wanted this, and then positioned this, kind of lined everything up. And then I flipped it over and made a little mark on there with a permanent pen so that I would know where to line this up and run it through my die cutting machine. And to help hold that in place so that it wouldn't move around, I'm just going to use a little bit of some mint tape. So we'll kind of flip this around, get the tape on the die there, and then play around with the position of it, get it centered and lined up there. Now you could also, if you have a hole punch that is the same size as the opening of the reinforcer, you could certainly use that as well. I just don't happen to have a die that's the same, or a punch that's the same size. They're either too small or too big. Once I get that lined up, and I just run that through. And then you have your hole, and then you can just repeat that process with the second one. All right, so now you're like, okay, we've been die cutting. What about the little embossing folder? Well, now we're coming to it. So With the embossing folder, we're going to be using a brayer to apply ink to the tag. And when I was playing around, I kind of decided that I preferred this side and the pattern that it created. And so what I'm going to do is place the tag face down. So in this instance, I'm using the textured cardstock side, and I'm going to place that face down in the embossing folder. Then you're just going to place it between a cutting pad and the embossing pad, and then just run that through the die cutting machine. And then flip that over and we have our embossed tag. So I'm just going to repeat that with the other tag. And as you'll see, so this is the textured side, and as you can see, the stripes that are more raised are a little bit thinner. The whiter stripes here are pressed down into the paper, and depending on which side of the paper you work on for this next step, it'll just give you a different look. So it's really just a personal preference. And then working on textured cardstock versus smooth cardstock, it's also going to give you a little different look. All right, so now we're going to add a little bit of interest to our tags, and we're going to be working on that side that has the textured from the cardstock that we embossed. And you're going to need your brayer, and I'm going to be working with this white pigment ink from scrapbook.com. And to get the ink onto the brayer, you're just going to roll it over the ink pad, just with a little bit of pressure. You can kind of go back and forth a little bit. Just kind of keep building it up, adding just a slight amount of pressure as you're pushing down into the ink pad. You're not smashing it down into it. You don't need that much ink. And just keep going until you just get a nice coating on there, at least wider than the width of your tag. And then you're just going to place your paper. I've got mine on a piece of just scrap, like printer paper, just to catch the excess ink, and so I don't have to clean off my mat. And then you're just going to roll that over the paper. Just lightly roll it over. You don't have to really even press it all. And then as you can see, that just kind of highlights the texture of the embossed pattern from that textured cardstock. It just kind of gives a nice little distressed vintage feel. And then you can just repeat that same thing with the other tag. And, so there are your tags with the ink on there. If you're working with the smooth side, or you want to work with smooth cardstock, I'm just going to kind of show you here what that would look kind of like. I mean, this isn't smooth cardstock, so it's not going to be as smooth as regular cardstock, but just show you kind of how the different look you can get using that same embossing folder. So if you work with the smooth side, you're going to get more of a smooth pattern. This is also on this side, as you notice, the white stripes are a little whiter, so there seems like there's a little bit more white than red as compared to working on this side of the embossing folder where there's more green and less white. So it's just kind of another option of how you can use that same embossing folder to get different looks, just by flipping it over and using one side or the other of the embossing folder, and then using different kinds of cardstock in there as well. Another option is if you didn't want to use the white ink, you could also use a red ink, like a darker red ink, so that would give you a little contrast with that light red, and a darker green. Just lots of options depending on what colors you're working with. And then from here, it's really just a matter of assembling all your little pieces. One option that you can do if you want is to take a little bit of some ground espresso and a mini blending sponge and just kind of wipe some of that excess onto your craft mat. And then if you want to just lightly ink the edges of your die cuts to give them a little bit more of a vintage feel, you can do that. I mean, you don't need to do that with all the teeny little pieces, but some of these larger pieces that maybe you want to give a little bit more interest to them. On this one here, just kind of knocks back that stark white edge a little bit. And you can do that with the Santa. And then, you know, just kind of continue that with the various pieces that you have there. As far as a couple of these pieces that we are going to kind of custom color, this is where the Distress watercolor pencils come in. You could also use Distress inks with this, and I'm just picking up that pigment using my water brush here and then just painting that onto the cardstock there. And then you can let that dry, and then if you want it a little bit darker, you can add another layer of color. And then this is the dried marigold, and I'm just using that to create the kind of the skin section for my Santa. But of course you can make that any color you like. And then, you know, you can ink the edges of that if you like. And then from here, it's really just a matter of assembling the various pieces. And there's multiple options that you can use. I do prefer to use some sort of precision tip applicator, such as the Artiste glue from scrapbook.com. There's also the precision glue press from My Sweet Petunia. And then, but any kind of a fine tip will make it a little bit easier when working, especially with some of these smaller pieces as you go to assemble this. And then the last thing I want to do is create some custom colored ribbon. And I've had people asking me about this a little bit, so I thought I'd just kind of share how I like to do it. And I like to work in my splat box with just some paper towels in the bottom of it to absorb the excess ink. And then I kind of start by just kind of getting my ribbon in here, and a lot of times I'll just kind of go ahead and get this wet to start with, just so it's just kind of ready to absorb the ink. And then just picking out whatever kind of ink color you want to work with. Now, if you don't want to get your hands all inky and stainy, I would highly recommend wearing a pair of gloves, and I just have a pair that I kind of reuse until they can't be reused anymore. So as you can see, these are kind of stained from using it with various alcohol inks and luster wax and all kinds of good stuff. So, and then I just give that some good spritzes, and then you can just work that ink into the ribbon. If you want a little darker, just add a little bit more there. And then from there, you can just use your heat tool to dry the ribbon. And if you're sensitive with heat to your hands, you could just kind of wrap this, like the paper towel, around it a little bit to soak up some of it, and then, you know, just kind of put your hand in there as needed to kind of ball it up again a little bit, you know, with the heat off, and then bring the heat back in and kind of, you know, back and forth with it that way to get it till it's dry. You could also just let it air dry if you want to, just kind of crinkle it up, keep it in a little ball and just let it dry. Probably would take a little while. It might, you know, be the next day before you'd be able to use it. So if you're in a hurry, you might want to use the heat tool. And then just kind of repeat that same process with the green. Now, if you've got all this ink on your hand, you might want to just kind of wipe off your glove hand, just so you don't get that red everywhere. And then now I'm going to do that same thing with the green one. Just going to get it wet a little bit. See, and you can see I still had red on my gloves, so it's stained on there a little bit. So I'm going to wipe that off a little bit better. There we go. And now we'll just add our rustic wilderness. And then you're just going to do the same thing there with the drying. Crinkle it up and dry, and repeat that till it's all dry. And when you are drying, you just want to make sure that you're not holding the heat tool up on it super close or too long, so that you don't burn it or start melting the ribbon or anything like that. So just kind of be careful when you're applying the heat. Just kind of keep the tool moving and the ribbon moving so you don't overheat it. So now we've got all little die cuts assembled, and the edges are all inked on those. And then I also inked the edges of the tags and the little reinforcer holes. And before or after I adhered the reinforcer on there, I'm just use a little scissors to trim off that little bit of overhang there. And then, ink the edge of that. And then they're really ready to assemble. So we can add the ribbon, and then you can add the sentiment, which I stamped onto white cardstock and also inked the edges of that. And then just gonna go about adding each of the little characters to the tag with the sentiment. And then we'll add the twine and the ribbon. And then I'm also going to be adding a little holly berry and some of the little berries onto each of these as well. Here's a look at the finished tags after I've assembled all the pieces that we created during the video. And as you can see, I adhered the twine and then tied a little bow around it using the seam binding that we dyed, and then adhered all the various die cuts and the sentiment pieces. And for simplicity, I only ended up using one of the berries on the holly leaves. I just felt it was a little less cumbersome and time consuming to just add that one little berry, and it still just adds a nice little punch of color there to the leaves. Hopefully you can see how doing something like this could easily become like a compartmental type process, so that you could do the die cutting, you could do the spraying of the backgrounds, you could do the brayering of the ink onto the tags, you could do the assembling of the different die cuts, you could create the ribbon, and then you could assemble the whole entire tag. So you can kind of break this down into steps if you're wanting to make a bunch of these, and just do all, kind of plan out what you want to do, what colors you want to use, what inks you want to use, and dyes and stamps and all that. And then just kind of break it down into the steps and just do one little step at a time to create a bunch of these if you wanted to use these for your gift tags. Now, if gift tags aren't your thing, this would be super easy to add on to the front of a card. I mean, you could easily take like a sprayed background and add a tag onto the front of it. If you wanted to do a little bit of some layering, you could take two tags and kind of assemble them, maybe one with the stuff on it and one that's blank, just to kind of fill out the card a little bit more. You could do it onto a stamped background, a piece of patterned paper. I think there's kind of a variety of ways. If you wanted to create some little smaller mini tags or mini cards, you could, cut this down and adhere the tags to the cards. You could also have these removable, so this could actually even become like a little Christmas ornament if you wanted. So just a lot of options for how you could use this set to create tags and cards and even Christmas ornaments for the upcoming holidays. And also maybe some ideas on how you could use some of these techniques with some of the other side order sets and just give you even more possibilities for year-round making. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.